We can't stop it. Not with all the lawyers, guns, and money in this world. Not with guilt, or morality, or righteous indignation. Not with crime summits, or task forces, or committees. Not with policy decisions made in places that can't be seen from the lost corner of Fayette and Monroe. No lasting victory in the war on drugs can be bought by doubling the number of beat cops or tripling the number of prison beds. No peace can come from kingpin statutes and civil forfeiture laws and warrantless searches and whatever the hell else is about to be tossed into next year's omnibus crime bill. Down on Fayette Street, they know. Today, as on every other day, the shop will be open by mid-morning, and the touts will be on the corners, chirping out product names as if the stuff is street legal. The runners will bring a little more of the package down, and the fiends will queue up to be served, a line of gaunt, passive supplicants stretching down the alley and around the block. The corner is rooted in human desire, crude and certain and immediate. And the hard truth is that all the law enforcement in the world can't mess with desire. Down at Fayette and Monroe, and every corner like it in Baltimore, the dealers and fiends have won because they are legion. They've won because the state of Maryland and the federal government have imprisoned thousands and arrested tens of thousands and put maybe 100,000 on the parole and probation rolls, and still it isn't close to enough. By raw demographics, the men and women of the corners can claim victory. In Baltimore alone, a city of fewer than 700,000 souls, with some of the highest recorded rates of intravenous drug use in the nation, they are 50, perhaps even 60,000 strong. 3 of them for every available prison bed in the entire state of Maryland. The slingers are manning more than 100 open-air corners, serving up product as fast as they can get it off a southbound metro liner. And the fiends are chasing down that blast 24/7. In neighborhoods where no other wealth exists, they have constructed an economic engine so powerful that they'll readily sacrifice everything to it. And make no mistake, that engine is humming. No slacking profit margins, no recessions, no bad quarterly reports, no layoffs, no naturalized unemployment rate. In the empty heart of our cities, the culture of drugs has created a wealth-generating structure so elemental and enduring that it can legitimately be called a social compact. From the outside looking in, it's tempting to see this nightmare as a model of supply and demand run amok, as a lawlessness bred from an unenforceable prohibition. But the reckoning at Fayette and Monroe, and other places like it, has grown into something greater than the medical mechanics of addiction, greater even than the dollars and cents of economic theory. Get it straight. They're not just out here to sling and shoot drugs. That's where it all began, to be sure, but 30 years has transformed the corner into something far more lethal and lasting than a simple marketplace. The men and women who live the corner life are redefining themselves at incredible cost, cultivating meaning in a world that has declared them irrelevant. At Monroe and Fayette, and in drug markets in cities across the nation, lives without any obvious justification are given definition through a simple, self-sustaining capitalism. The corner has a place for them, every last soul. touts, runners, lookouts, mules, stick-up boys, stash dealers, enforcers, fiends, burn artists, police snitches. All are necessary in the world of the corner. Each is to be used, abused, and ultimately devoured with unfailing precision. In this place only they belong. In this place only they know what they are, why they are, and what it is that they are supposed to do. Here, they almost matter. On Fayette Street today, the corner world is what's left to serve up truth and power, money and meaning. It gives life and takes life. It measures all men as it mocks them. It feeds and devours the multitudes in the same instant. Amid nothing, the corner is everything. We want it to be about nothing more complicated than cash, money, and human greed, when, at bottom, it's about a reason to believe. We want to think that it's chemical, that it's all about the addictive mind, when instead it has become about validation, about lost souls assuring themselves that a daily relevance can be found at the fine point of a disposable syringe. It's about the fiends, thousands of them who want that good dope, needing it the way other souls need to breathe air. Working men on their lunch hour come here, rubbing up against corner dwellers who haven't seen a job in 10 years. White boys from county high schools quietly praying they won't get burned for their allowance stand next to welfare mothers who petition the same God on behalf of their check day money. Up on Monroe Street, there's a 91-year-old retiree in the line handing his cash to 14-year-old slingers. And down the hill on Mount, there's that prim little matron who shows up in her Sunday best. Print dress, heels, white pillbox hat and veil. A church-going woman, shuttling between choir and corner. And every other day on Mount or Gilmore Streets, the regulars get a glimpse of that tired little white girl from downtown, the one with the bloated hands, who everyone says is some kind of lawyer. Black niggers, white niggers. You get down here at Ground Zero, and finally the racial obsessions don't mean anything. With 20 on the hype, hanging in the balance, there's only the perfect equality of need and desire. Here on Fayette Street, the fiends wait the wait, praying for the same righteous connect, taking a chance and carrying a little piece of the package away. Then they fire up and feel that wave roll and crest. And it's about the slingers, the young crews working the packages, all of them willing to trade a morality that they've never seen or felt for a fleeting moment of material success. And true, the money is its own argument. Not punch the clock, sweep the floor, and wait for next Friday money, but cash money, paid out instantly to the vacant-eyed kids serving the stuff. Still, they are working the package with a hidden knowledge that they will fall, that with rare exception, the money won't last, and the ride will be over in 6 months, or 4, or 3. They all do it not so much for the cash, which they piss away anyhow, but for a brief sense of self. All of them are cloaked in the same gangster dream. All of them cursed by the lie that says they finally have a stake in something. By such standards, the corner proves itself every day. That it destroys whatever it touches hardly matters. For an instant in time, at least, those who serve the corners have standing and purpose. This is an existential crisis rooted not only in race, which the corner has slowly transcended, but in the unresolved disaster of the American Rust Belt, in the slow seismic shift that is shutting down the assembly lines, devaluing physical labor, and undercutting the union pay scale. Down on the corner, some of the walking wounded used to make steel. But Sparrows Point isn't hiring the way it once did. And some used to load the container ships at Seagirt and Locust Point. But the port isn't what she used to be either. Others worked at Koppers, American Standard, or Armco. But those plants are gone now. All of which means precious little to anyone thriving in the post-industrial age. For those of us riding the wave, the world spins on an axis of technological prowess in an orbit of ever-expanding information. In that world, the men and women of the corner are almost incomprehensibly useless, and have been so for more than a decade now. How do we bridge that chasm? How do we begin to reconnect with those now lost to the corner world? As a beginning, at least, we need to shed our fixed perceptions and see it fresh from the inside. We've got to begin to think as Gary McCullough thinks when he's flat broke and sick with desire, crawling through some vacant row house in search of scrap metal. Or live for a moment at least, as Fat Kurt lives when he's staggering back and forth between corner and shooting gallery. Or feel as Hungry feels when he's out there on a Monroe Street stoop, watching and waiting and gathering himself up for the moment when he'll creep down the alley and for the third time that week grab up some New York boy's ground stash, consigning himself to yet another bloody beating, because stash snatching is the caper he knows, and blood or no blood, Hungry will have his daily blast. We need to start over, to admit that somehow the forces of history and race, economic theory, and human weakness have conspired to create a new and peculiar universe in our largest cities. Our rules and imperatives don't work down here. We've got to leave that useless baggage of a society and culture that still maintains the luxury of reasonable judgments. Against all the sanction we can muster, this new world is surviving, expanding, thriving, consuming everything in its path. To insist that it should be otherwise, on the merits of some external morality, is to provoke a futile debate. Is West Baltimore or East New York? Is North Philly or Southern Chicago listening anymore? So how can our best arguments matter? Consider the corner for a moment as something apart from a social disaster, as something that has instead become organic and central within our cities. In the natural world, much is often made of the watering hole, the oasis in a small stand of acacia trees to which creatures great and small come for sustenance. The life-giving elixir brings them all, predators and prey, the vast herds and the solitary wanderers, the long of tooth and those new to the vale. Brick and mortar, asphalt and angles. The corner is no less elemental to the inner cities of America. Day and night they come, lured by coke and dope, ignoring the risks and dangers as any animal in need of a life force must. Wildebeests and zebras, no. The predominant herds on this veld are the hollow-eyed gunners and pipers, driven to the water's edge by a thirst that cries out from every last cell, every doper or coke fiend reassured against risk by the anonymity of the crowd, by the comfort that greater numbers allow. There are the big cats, the dealers, who rule the turf on reputation and occasional savagery, and the jackals, you follow them. Burn artists and stash dealers roaming the fringe, feeding on the weak and the inattentive. The hyenas, the stick-up boys, are nocturnal outcasts whose only allegiance is to opportunity itself. Lumbering elephants? The police, perhaps, who are heard from a great distance and arrive with bombast. They rule only where they stand. Once, it was altogether different. Generations back, it was a hipster's game, a fringe hustle, played out in basements and after-hours clubs. The dope peddlers were few, and anathema. The users cool and carried by bebop rhythms, their addiction more or less a function of social rebellion or alienation. And the numbers? If there were 2,000 addicts in the Baltimore of 1958, then the city police department's 3-officer narcotics squad had its handful. But came the 1960s, and that early innocence was followed hard by the heroin wave that crested in every East Coast city. In Baltimore, there were dollar capsules for sale in all the Pennsylvania Avenue night spots. And a single dollar of that ancient shit would drop a dope fiend for the entire day. Demand moved beyond the musicians and beats, out into the back alleys, inching its way toward a handful of corners in the worst housing projects. East Side, West Side. The dealers, once defiantly anonymous, became success stories for an increasingly alienated ghetto world. Bona fide gangster caricatures with territories and soldiers and reputations. Little Melvin, Big Lucille, Gangster Webster, Kid Henderson, Liddy Jones, Snyder Blanchard. These West Baltimore names still ring in the ears of the older players and fiends. Names that produced organizations and inspired the next generation of street dealers. And overnight, the money got serious. The users, an army unto themselves, were serviced daily in back alleys and housing project stairwells by men who were, on some level, careerists, committed to distribution networks that paid them, protected them, paid their bails, and took care of their people when they went away to Hagerstown or Jessup. These men were professional in outlook, lethal but not reckless, and by and large, they lived with an acknowledged code to it. They didn't use what they sold. They didn't serve children or use children to serve, just as they wouldn't sell to wide-eyed virgins looking to skin pop for the first time. They carried the threat of violence like a cloak. But in the end, they didn't shoot someone, unless someone needed to get shot. When a bullet was necessary, there were always pros available. Dennis Wise or Vernon Collins by name, men willing, in the Pennsylvania Avenue gangster parlance, to get in close, take aim, and hit the right nigger. What was bad for business was hunted with a vengeance. Stick-up boys, if they survived, carried a bounty on their heads. burn artists were driven deep into the shadows. This earlier generation stayed serious, cautious. On a business level, at least, they understood responsibility and were therefore responsible with the package. More often than not, the count was exactly right, and all the cash got turned over on time. They took precautions. They wouldn't sell to just anyone who came past. They knew what a dope fiend looked like. If they didn't know your name or face, they'd check your shoe leather, your clothes, your build, the veins on your arms. All of it was scrutinized because in the end, it was pure humiliation for them to serve a police. They were a fixture in the neighborhood, but they were discreet. They took your money, but 10 minutes might pass and they'd be half a block away before some other drone handed you the glassine bag. They could jail if they had to, but they tried their damnedest to stay out of the cuffs. To them, a charge was something to be avoided at all costs. And by and large, when a charge came, they didn't snitch. They worked the lawyers to limit the time. By the mid-1970s, a succession of federal task forces had knocked down most of the name dealers. Melvin was in Lewisburg, Liddy in Marion. Gangster Webster would soon fall to a 50-year bit. Kid Henderson was dead, and Big Lucille Westcott dying. But the seeds they planted surpassed them and grew to maturity. Their children numbered in the tens of thousands and were now down on the neighborhood corners, no longer a mere irritant on the periphery, but out in the open and in full opposition to the community. The organized drug rings shifted, merged, diverged, then shifted again. Still, on some basic level, the code was maintained. At least, until the coke came. Cocaine changed the world. The heroin trade was limited to the hardcore, but the arrival of cheap, plentiful cocaine in the early and mid-1980s broke down all the barriers and let everyone play. Both are white powder, but each has a distinct pharmacological flavor. Dope is the downer, the heavy. A couple of trips to the corner, a $20 investment, and a fiend has enough in him to suffer the day. Coke is the rush to the wire, all of it gone in a flash, and never enough to slake that thirst. With heroin, even the hungriest fiend can look to a limit. Coke demands that every bill that can be begged or borrowed or stolen goes up to the corner. And unless a fiend is set on firing speedballs, Coke can go in clean. No need for any squeamishness about the syringe. A pipe and a nugget of Ready Rock does just fine. Even a quick snort is enough for the rush. In the beginning, they said it wasn't even addictive. Not like dope, anyway. They called it girl, or Missy, or Jane, in feminine contrast to boy, or John, or Mr. for King heroin. But Coke has a power all its own. When Coke hit Baltimore in the mid-1980s, it went beyond the existing addict population, gathering a new market share, for the first time bringing the women to the corner in startling numbers. More white boys came for it too, some of them from the hillbilly neighborhoods just down the hill, others from the farthest reaches of suburbia. And many of them kept coming back, 4 or 5 times an hour, feeding their frenzy until the money ran out. And where once the coke fiends began their tour with a snort, by the late 80s, most of the trade was on the pipe, smoking up that boiled down rock. Crack, they called it in New York. Ready rock, cried the Fayette Street touts. Got that ready. By the turn of the decade, the survivors graduated to speedballs, mainlighting the coke and dope together for the ultimate rush. The heroin was the base. It leveled you out and got you well. The coke went on top for the extra boost that morphine always lacked. Baltimore stumbled and staggered through the decade-long cocaine epidemic, emerging in the mid-1990s as the city with the highest rate of intravenous drug use in the country, according to government estimates. And of the tens of thousands of hardcore users, the vast majority were using coke and dope simultaneously. Even those fearful of the needle could find snorting heroin that was 60% pure, then top that off with a pipeful of ready. Old-time dopers were disgusted. To them, heroin alone seemed a reasoned lifestyle choice when compared to the havoc that followed. Watching the pipers and speedballers get bum rushed on the corners, they would shake their heads and mutter. Even to them, it was a low-bottom addiction. Even to them, it was pathetic. With heroin alone, the sources of supply seemed finite and organizational. Access was limited to those with a genuine connection to the New York suppliers, who had, in turn, cultivated a connection to a small number of importers. The cocaine epidemic changed that as well, creating a freelance marketplace with 20-year-old wholesalers supplying 17-year-old dealers. Anyone could ride the Amtrak or the Greyhound to New York and come back with a package. By the late 80s, the professionals were effectively marginalized in Baltimore. Cocaine and the open market made the concept of territory irrelevant to the city drug trade. It didn't stop there either. Cocaine kicked the dealers' code in the ass, because as the organizations gave way, so did standards. On every corner, street dealers began using minors, first as lookouts and runners, then as street-level slingers. In the beginning, these were the toughest kids, the criminal prodigies, born and bred in the most distressed families, welcomed by dealers who were contending with stiffened penalties for sale. It made sense to hire juveniles for the street work. Why risk a 5-year bit when any 15-year-old with heart could sling vials, take a charge, then carry whatever weight a juvenile courtmaster might put on it? It was a reasonable strategy at first, but 10 years down the road, the internal logic was no longer valid. Amid chronic prison overcrowding, a few adults were getting time for street-level drug distribution in Baltimore. Probation and pre-trial time served was the order of the day. Yet the children stayed on the corners. Not so much as camouflage, but because good help was hard to find. The code had failed. The touts, the runners, even the street-level dealers were violating the cardinal rule and using their own product. And not just dope, which might have permitted some stability, but coke, or coke and dope together. The pipeheads graduated to heroin, the dope fiends speedballed. And somewhere in this wild cocktail party, the packages started coming up short. The money began disappearing, and the touts and lookouts were suddenly wandering off post. Down on Fayette Street, reliability was out the window, and not even the threat of violence could stop country from putting a quarter of Scar's package up his nose, or Eggy Daddy from claiming that he had to give $60 of G's money to some imaginary stick-up boy. What was a slinger to do? The children weren't exactly captains of industry either. They'd mess up in their own way if you let them. But most weren't using anything harder than weed. And most were ready and willing to work conscientiously for a bit of pocket money. In contrast to the hardcore fiends, dealers came to see that you could extract some loyalty from adolescents, or intimidate them if necessary. The teenagers would, in turn, bring in younger kids to sling and run for them, until at last, the day of the 10-year-old drug dealer was at hand. The trend only accelerated as more young mothers went to the corner chasing coke, and single-parent families already under pressure began to implode. More than heroin ever did, cocaine battered at what had for generations been the rock-hard foundation for the urban black family. Heroin had been claiming its share of West Baltimore men for 30 years, but the cheap cocaine of the 1980s had turned the women out, bringing them to the corner in numbers previously unthinkable. Where once, on Fayette Street, there had been a network of single mothers who managed to get the essentials done, there was now raw anarchy in many homes. And where a discussion of single-parent households once seemed relevant to places like Fayette Street, now there loomed the new specter of children who were in reality parentless. Unattended and undisciplined, these children were raising themselves in the street, free to begin their inexorable drift, drawn not only by quick money, but by the game of it. 13-year-olds who had cut classes and played hoops and run the back alleys together now banded together as a crew, playing gangster, slinging vials, and ducking the police. In West Baltimore, the corner became the fun house, offering camaraderie and standing and adventure. What, after all, could compete with the thrill of suddenly being the man, of having your own bomb of a package on the corner, standing there under the sodium vapor lights as grown men and women seek you out and commence to begging. This one wants a job as a tout. This one is short 4 bills and asking to slide. That one offers her body for 3 vials. And in the end, it wasn't just the valedictorians of Hickey School in Boys Village and every other state juvenile facility out there on the corner. It was all save the stoop kids, the well-parented few who weren't allowed beyond their front steps. All across the inner city, from Lafayette Courts to Sandtown to Cherry Hill, slinging drugs was the rite of passage. When children became the labor force, the work itself became childlike, and the organizational structure that came with heroin's first wave was a historical footnote. In the 1990s, the drug corner is modeled on nothing more complicated than a fast food emporium, an environment in which dealing drugs requires about as much talent and finesse as serving burgers. No discretion, no precautions. The modern corner has no need for the applied knowledge of previous generations. Where once a competent street dealer would never be caught touching the dope, the more brainless of his descendants now routinely carries the shit in one pocket, money in the other. Wiser souls might work a ground stash a small inventory of coke or dope hidden in the weeds or rubbish a few feet away. But 10 minutes after selling out, they'll be out under a streetlight, counting their grip, manicuring the $10 and $5 bills into a clean roll, and fairly begging for the attentions of a knocker or a stick-up artist. Close scrutiny of customers has become anachronism too. The new school serves anyone, known fiends and strangers, ragged or well-heeled, white or black, young or old, in battered pickups or fresh off the lot BMWs, with an indifference as careless as it is democratic. The precision and subtlety of the game have been replaced by raw retailing. Open-air bazaars with half a dozen crews out on post, barking the names of their product like Lexington Market grocers. Corners are crowded with competing crews, each pushing the claim that their own product is true and righteous. With heroin, labels are stamped right on the glassine packet. Killer Bee, Lethal Weapon, The Terminator, Diamond in the Raw, Tech 9. Free testers are tossed out every morning as a word-of-mouth advertising for the coming package. And the touts are constantly trumpeting blue light specials. 2 for the price of 1. Or a free vial of Coke with every dime of dope. Or family-sized packets offering much more blast for just a little more cash. Where only $10 vials of Coke are being sold, a fresh crew can carve a niche with a $5 offering. And if one crew's product is too good to match straight up, a competing group might lace its package with a little strychnine. A bomb that might or might not drop a fiend dead, but definitely gets his attention either way. Dealers and fiends alike go about this business from a herd-like trust in their own overwhelming numbers to protect them from the random drug arrest. Violence, too, is no longer the prerogative of the professional, but a function of impulse and emotion. The contract killers and the well-planned assassinations of earlier eras are mere myth on these corners. Now, the moment of truth generally comes down to some man-child with hurt feelings, waving a .38 around and spraying bullets up and down the block. The accidental shooting of bystanders, a rare event in the organizational era, is now commonplace. As for snitching, that part of the code is also dead and buried. No organizational ethic makes sense when everyone is shorting and getting shorted by everyone else. When loyalty is absent even within a crew that grew up together. In the new order, anyone can and will say anything for even the smallest advantage. When the arrests come, they are regarded as routine misadventures, small setbacks that in most cases mean little more than a few nights on a city jail tier, followed by an appointment with a state probation officer that is, more often than not, ignored. Worse still, the absence of a real deterrent has bred a stupidity in the new school that is, for lack of a better word, profound. Few seem to learn from the experience of getting caught. They take the same charge, time and again, jacked up by the same police who use the same tricks to gather the same evidence from the same corners. At times, the younger ones senselessly provoke the charge through bluster and pride, as no old-timer would. Eye fuck for eye fuck, curse for curse, insult for insult, until Collins or Pitbull or Peanut Head is out of the cruiser and swinging the nightstick hard, enraged at being called a bitch by some 17-year-old hopper. Once charged, there is no strategy or defense. Nothing for the lawyers to work with. No attempt to limit time, because, in most cases, there is no time. When someone does finally go away for a year or two on a fourth or fifth offense, well, it's all in the game. Prison itself is regarded with vague indifference. The operant logic on the corner is that the hardcore gangster stance is what matters. That if it's time to jail, then you jail. You carry it like it means nothing, telling yourself the old prison tier lie that says you really only do 2 days, the day you go in and the day you come out. Cocaine and the expanding marketplace have changed the landscape of the corner, forging a boomtown industry that has room not only for the professional criminals and the committed addicts who have lingered on the fringe of the neighborhood for so long, but for everyone and anyone. Men and women, parents and children, the fools and the clever ones, even the derelicts and outcasts who had no viable role when drug distribution was a structured enterprise, all are assimilated into the corner world of the 1990s. At Fayette and Monroe and so many other corners in so many other cities, it's nothing more or less than the